Okay, bonsoir, good evening. Welcome to the Giacometti Institute. Welcome to this inaugural École des Modernités lecture for the 2024-2025 year. I'm happy to have you here presently in the room and also following us online. Before presenting our dear guest tonight, who's Thomas Röske, just next to me, thank you Thomas for coming, I'd like to make a brief announcement about the two last issues in the book series of the École des Modernités program. These are the two books that are just released. Suzanne Duchamp par elle-même, written by Talia Quartler, first survey completed on Suzanne Duchamp, and a very lesser known artist from Pakistan, Zubaydah Agha. That's a book written by Saira Ansari, and we're happy to publish it within the École des Modernités book series. I'd like also to remind you that this year's program 2024-2025 is available online on the website of the Giacometti Foundation and on our YouTube channel, so don't hesitate to register and have a look at forthcoming lectures. We'll be happy to have you in person in Paris or following us online. Tonight, the lecture will be given by Thomas Röske. Thomas Röske is an art historian. He is presently the director of the Prinzhorn collection at the University Hospital in Heidelberg, and has been since 2002. Since 2012, he is also president of the European Outsider Art Association. He is involved in many research projects about art from psychiatric contexts between 1945 and 1990, and about the self-location of asylum patients around the 1900. It's called that program, Homes Outside and Inside. Thomas Röske was also the co-creator of Symbolism und Wahnsinn in 2009, and among the most recent exhibition he created are one of the artists Elfriede Loser-Wächtler, organized in 2023, and another one called On Victims of National National Socialist Crimes in the Prinzhorn collection. It's entitled People Who Still Could Live, from 2023-2024. Tonight's lecture is devoted to a major subject that has let a lot of ink drench. It's called Madness and Modernism. That's a book title by Louis Sass, of course. The suggestion Thomas made was discussing the status of artistry and mental ill between 1900 and 1930. Indeed, you might know as much as the production of mentally ill patients were introduced within the avant-garde circles, mostly around surrealism, but not only. So infused the avant-garde movements around the world by that time, but the qualification of it, the conditions in which it was introduced in those circles and discussed and understood is still being discussed, and Thomas will present us tonight version discussions of this. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation, Thomas. We're very happy to discuss such subjects that are dear to me tonight, and hope the conversation then after will grow on this. So thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the introduction. I will talk tonight about three authors and their attitude towards the topic, artistry of the mentally ill. I will mainly concentrate, of course, on Prinzhorn, and I will talk about fruitful misunderstandings, you could say, from modernist artists of artworks by mentally ill people. I'm mainly concerned with that from the viewpoint of today. There is a big discussion at the moment, not only in Germany, but I know also in other countries, about artworks by people who are either mentally ill or mentally handicapped, and usually are called, their artworks are usually called outsider art or Brut. And there is a big opposition, meanwhile, against the term outsider art, which is seen as a kind of marker for exclusion, which is historically, of course, a complete misunderstanding. Originally, Brut and outsider art were meant to differentiate, but in a positive way, discriminate in a positive way, artworks by people at the fringes of the art scene from the cultural art, as Dubuffet called it. Nevertheless, I think it's interesting to deal with the term again, which was done, for example, by Lynn Cook in her big exhibition about outliers in American avant-garde art. It was mainly about naive artists, but also some outsider artists and their impact on American avant-garde art. Or the book by Lisa Slominski, Nonconformers, suggests another term for people at the fringe of the art scene. And inclusion is shown in different ways on big exhibitions like the Documenta in 2022, especially under the headline of collective working. Supported studios were included as art collectives, which is an interesting viewpoint, and maybe also a very important contribution to the discussion in future, because all over Europe there are several hundreds of these supported studios, much or many more as you may think there are. And I think this is a kind of creative potential which we should be aware of in the next future, under which title ever. My question is it true what people suggest, or is it valid what people suggest, that we should just talk about art and not longer discriminate between artworks by so-called outsider artists or Brut artists and the rest of the art world? It's an open discussion, and I wanted to look back at the beginnings of the interest in this field to see how those people who talked about it, artists and psychiatrists, how they dealt with that problem and how they felt these artworks should be positioned. Maybe it's not superfluous to point out that there is a string of discussion in the psychiatric field which is excluding up to today those positions which try to identify certain characteristics which would help to discriminate these works from other artworks. In this train of discussion, we find the first publications of drawings by mental ill patients. The first one, which is not really a publication of the drawing, is by John Haslam in his book Illustrations of Madness, which was published in 1810. In the back of the book you find a fold-out with this print. It's a print after drawing. The drawing has not survived. We do not know how faithfully this print was following the drawing. Probably not very faithfully. It was correcting probably a lot of the features of this drawing, because James Tilly Matthews, who was a patient of the Bethlehem Royal Hospital at that time, was not a draftsman but a tea broker, who probably did just a very cursive sketch of his idea of an influencing machine. This is an air loom, something which produces bad streams of air combined with electricity to influence people or just to kill them. It's the first influencing machine, of which we know, by the way, as well. The first drawing which was faithfully reproduced can be found in Ambroise Tardieu's Études médico-légales de la folie, also one of the first books which talks a bit more at length about drawings and writings by mental ill patients, but also mainly under diagnostic viewpoints. Tardieu does not indicate that he sees any artistic value in these works. He is more interested in the connection with the story behind it. The drawing was done by somebody who did a portrait of his wife, which you can see in the middle of the drawing, and there are some energy lines going out from her, which he viewed when she was sitting in the living room. Nevertheless, it's amazing that in 1872 there is a faithful reproduction of a free drawing of a mental ill patient already. Cesare Lombroso is also to see in this line, of course, with his book Genius and Madness, which includes a chapter about artworks by mentally ill patients, visual artworks from the edition 1880 onwards, but he does not show any of these works. And in fact, the story goes on. There is a very influential book in German, Characteristics of Schizophrenic Artistry, published in 1962-66, which wants to identify typical mad drawings, you could say, or drawings by psychiatric patients. And even in 2017, an anthropologist from Halle, Christoph Redis, did a project in which he tried to differentiate artworks by mentally ill people from other artworks. He tried to find out, you could say, information density on different levels and wanted to compare professional artworks and artworks from the Prinzhorn collection. In fact, he didn't find much difference. But obviously this urge to somehow differentiate from the viewpoint of psychiatrists is not stoppable. It will go on probably in future. We in the Prinzhorn collection, I say the people working there, the team, we are all cultural historians, and we were from the beginning of the museum, which opened in 2001, very much interested in the connection between artworks from mentally ill people and the art world. That was a string of exhibitions we did, starting with Expressionism and Madness in 2003, which was first shown in Schleswig and then in Heidelberg, then Surrealism and Madness in 2009, and there is a big 2-volume edition of artists reacting to the Prinzhorn collection. We were very proud to show that the art history of the 20th century probably would have looked differently without the Prinzhorn collection. So there are so many artists, visual, musical, writers, even directors of films which were influenced by artworks from the Prinzhorn collection, that it was possible to fill these 2 books with it. Afterwards, I had a bit of a bad consciousness because I thought, was it really necessary to convince people of the value of the artworks in the Prinzhorn collection with the viewpoints of professional artists? And I will get back to that question later. Another revelation for me was that I suddenly realized there is another movement in art which was as important as Expressionism and Surrealism, as you could say, as a kind of midwife to discover artworks by mentally ill people, and that's the Symbolism. I think that Ambroise Tardieu introduced these drawings may also be influenced by Symbolism of its time, because it's the first movement which tries to show, make visible the invisible. And we know that the symbolists were also interested in mediumistic art. We did a show about that, which was not called Symbolism and Madness, but it was called Plants of the Soul, which was shown in 2018, 2019. It was a show which started with mediumistic drawings from the 19th century. In fact, the theme of the flower or the plant is very important from the beginning of artworks which later were called Art Brut or outsider art up to today. And also in a lot of artworks by mentally ill people, plants play a big role as symbols as well. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that the art movement of symbolism somehow opened the eyes for people for the aesthetic value of artworks done at the fringe of society, mediumistic art and also artworks by mentally ill people. Probably you know that there is a discussion if the writing in this picture may indicate that Edvard Munch was also had also knowledge about artworks by mentally ill people, because with pencil there is something written in one of the dark red lights in the sky. He wrote in that, and you can nearly see it. Nowadays there is a big barrier in front of this picture and you cannot get close to it, but you can see the writing in this red cloud, and the writing is, "This could have done only by a madman." It has been discussed what that could mean, but it could maybe also mean that Edvard Munch compared his own work to the artwork of a psychiatric patient of which he may have had knowledge. Munch was somebody who was befriended with Marcel Rejá, and Rejá wrote about him, wrote art critics about him. He, as you probably know, was a psychiatrist. His real name was Paul Meunier. He was a psychiatrist in Villejuif, whose director was Auguste Marie. And Marie had a big collection of artworks by his patients. Marcel Rejá used this nom de plume, Paul Meunier used this nom de plume Marcel Rejá for this publication because it was the name under which he had also published poems, symbolist poems. He saw himself as a symbolist poet. So he was somehow involved in this symbolist movement, and I think that may have also opened his eyes for it, for the qualities and the aesthetics of artworks by mentally ill patients. In fact, he thinks in his short introduction of this book, he talks about visual artworks and then about the writings and poems of mentally ill patients. He is convinced that somehow the artworks of these people show tendencies which you can also see in other artworks. He talks of the urge of expression and the urge of configuration, which are shown in these works. But in the end, he says they are only embryonic forms of art. I just show two artworks which were formerly in the Auguste Marie collection and are now in the Lausanne collection. Both works, both artists are present in Rejá's book as well, which is illustrated with some black and white illustrations. He talks about the sexual content of the Fulmin Coton picture, which shows le prêtre adamique. And he talks about the decorative values in the work of the Voyageur Français. But he does not, although he says l'art chez les fous, he does not really call these works proper artworks, but just embryonic forms of art. Anyway, he publishes these works. And so with all these illustrations, he also obviously cherishes the aesthetics of these artworks. The next important book, which talks about artworks by mentally ill people, especially about one a mentally ill patient, is Walter Morgenthaler's little book, A Madman as Artist. The title is already revolutionary. He is not talking about art with the mad people, but he talks about a madman as an artist. He identifies Adolf Wölfli, about whom this book talks, as an artist, as a proper artist. He is also convinced that in the work of this artist, you can find somehow the ingredients which make art in general as well. He also talks about the urge of expression, and he talks about the urge of design. But for him, the later one, the functions which bring the urge of expression into a form, into a picture, are the main reason that he calls these works artworks. Wölfli produced a lot of big drawings like these here. These are this is a drawing which is about 100 centimeters high and 70 centimeters wide. They are all illustrations of his big book projects, and they are all different in composition. They all consist out of a mixture of figurative images, decorative forms, writings, and musical scores. And it's amazing that Wölfli, who just had a school education of 3 years, was able to put all these things together and produce compositions which are pleasing and somehow every time differ from each other. And that obviously is also something which Walter Morgenthaler made enthusiastic about these works. He said, Wölfli differs sharply from all average mentally ill producers through various formal functions, which are particularly strikingly expressed in his graphic products. He talks of objectivity functions, not a very lucky term. He took over from Hermann Ebbinghaus, a German psychologist. Ebbinghaus calls them Objektivitätsfunktion. It's not a much better term in Germany, unfortunately. His idea is that the psyche of everyone is consisting out of unformed emotions and then certain functions which help to structure these emotions. And for him, that is, and this is also quoted by Morgenthaler, the sense of space. Morgenthaler also talks of space instinct, a sense of relations, and a sense of time. Morgenthaler talks also of rhythm or time instinct. And it's really interesting that a little bit later on in his text, Morgenthaler asks, is it really this emergence of objectivity functions that makes Wölfli's products not only unique but also truly artistic? I think so. So he's somehow bringing our attention to his conclusion that this objectivity functions really make an artist out of Wölfli. That's amazing, I think, that he identifies Wölfli as an artist because he is able to put somehow an order and to put a structure onto his ideas and somehow structure what's coming out of him as a means of expression. So in a way, Morgenthaler is somehow also a child of his time, an expressionist who looks for the expression of emotion, but he is also a constructivist, you could say, who cherishes the ability to structure pictures and to somehow convince about the content of pictures with the help of a design which is original and also complex. In Heidelberg, the collection, which is now called the Prinzhorn collection, was started, you could say, by Emil Kraepelin. Emil Kraepelin is a very important figure in European history of psychiatry. Some of his ideas are still valid today. In fact, he was already before he came to Heidelberg in 1893, he was interested in artworks by patients. He collected some in his former places where he worked, but he really concentrated on that and started to put together a known collection only in Heidelberg. And one of the artists he was interested in was Johann Knopf, a Heidelberg peasant who later became a patient of the University Hospital in Heidelberg. Knüpfer was the name which was given to him later by Prinzhorn as a pseudonym. But Kraepelin was more in line with this idea of finding diagnostic help in the works of patients. In fact, he even tried to find out characteristics which would help him to identify madness with contemporary artists like Max Klinger or Stéphane Mallarmé, whom he was suspicious they were also mad or mentally ill. His assistant, Karl Willmans, continued collecting and also started already to take up artworks from other mental institutions in Germany, not only from Heidelberg and the nearby Wiesloch. And this Karl Willmans later became the head of the Lazaret system in Baden, of which Heidelberg is a part. And there he met somebody named Hans Prinzhorn. Prinzhorn was an art historian. He had studied art history and philosophy up to 1908. Then, with the help of money from his first wife, who was quite wealthy, he started another study. He studied singing. And then, when his second wife underwent a psychic crisis in 1913, and he felt helpless, not being able to help her, he decided to study a third time, this time medicine. And he finished his studies in 1917 and became a doctor in the Lazarets in Baden. There he met Willmans, and Willmans was very interested to find out that he was an art historian and had inclinations to become a psychiatrist as well. So he employed him and called him to become an assistant in Heidelberg at the Psychiatric University Clinic in Heidelberg from 1919. You can see here the old main building in a picture of 1890. This is the museum nowadays. It's in a building on that ground, but not in the old psychiatric building, but it's a lecture hall of the Department for Neurology. It was former a lecture hall of the Department of Neurology. Prinzhorn had the idea then to enlarge the collection, and he wanted to make a kind of research collection out of it. The Prinzhorn collection is not a collection of one specific doctor, but of a lot of psychiatrists all over the German-speaking countries, especially. He and Willmans sent out an appeal to a lot of psychiatric colleagues, also in some foreign countries, Japan, Netherlands, and Italy, and to ask for artworks to build up a museum for pathological art. He wanted to do groundwork, not only deal with some artworks which by chance came into his orbit, but he wanted to do proper research and hoped that he had enough material to do that after a while. The time he spent in Heidelberg was 2.5 years, and within that time, more than 5,000 artworks arrived in Heidelberg by roughly 450 men and women, psychiatric patients all over Europe. He left Heidelberg in June 21 already because this job as a director of a museum for pathological art didn't materialize, and he gave up hope and took his own path. He later became a psychotherapist, and he died quite early with 47 in 1933 already. But part of the contract had still to be fulfilled, a study he had to write about the collection, and that was issued in 1922. Bildnerei der Geisteskranken, ein Beitrag zur Psychologie und Psychopathologie der Gestaltung. It's a very medical title. Artistry of the Mentally Ill, Contribution to the Psychology and Psychopathology of Design. But you can already see when you open the book, the frontispiece is a colored image, a colored illustration, and the whole thing makes more the impression of an art book already when you open the book. In fact, it's not only the 360 pages this book consists of, which made it a classic up to today, and the lot of relevant questions Prinzhorn opens up in this book, but more the illustrations, because there were 187 illustrations in it, 170 alone from artworks of the Heidelberg collection. 20 of these illustrations were on good plates, printed in very good quality, either in black and white or in color. And they were all one-page color illustrations when they were in color. So you could see it's quite luxurious, especially for the time, 1922. That was in the middle of the inflation, and nobody had really money for such a book. But Prinzhorn urged everyone to give their best, and this book came out. And the illustrations, you could say, made the whole field for the first time visible, because also the book by Rejá and also by Morgenthaler only had some few illustrations in it. Morgenthaler, in fact, had also some colored illustrations, but they were big like stamps only. They were just very small illustrations. Prinzhorn really lushly illustrated the field in all its features, you could say, and therefore the book became very interesting for art lovers and artists especially. Psychiatrists also were interested in, and some also followed up and built up own collections. For example, one collection was by Weigand in Hamburg, another one by Pfeiffer in Leipzig. Both, unfortunately, did not survive the Nazi period. They were destroyed. The Prinzhorn collection survived probably because of the book and because it could be misused. Some of the works were sent to this infamous traveling exhibition, Degenerate Art, and they were used as comparative material there. Prinzhorn was interested in the artworks out of a similar reason as Rejá and maybe also as Morgenthaler. He was interested in finding out about features of art production in general. He thought that it was possible, especially with these works, to illustrate an own expressive theory of art. That's the chapter with which this book starts. Prinzhorn develops an own expressive theory of art. So it's more founded as what Rejá and Morgenthaler did, although it goes in the same direction. He also thinks there is an expressive urge at the base of art making. It could also influence other areas of life. In fact, he thinks the expressive urge is a kind of life-deciding moment for everybody, And you could say he's nearly thinking like Beuys already. Everyone is an artist of his own life. And for him, this expressive urge has to be combined with certain other urges or drives to lead to artworks. There is a playful urge and there is a decorative urge, which could lead to some other moments as well, not art and not artistic production. But if they come together with the expressive urge, they form the base for an urge to compose or design. The German word Gestaltung is not really easy to translate in English, and you can see that also in the translation of Prinzhorn's book, which differs a lot in the terms which Prinzhorn uses. I hope there will someday somebody who will try to do a better translation, but I have used this plate here, this schema from this English translation of 72. And you can see Prinzhorn is very much interested in urges, so he is of course also a child of his time, not only in being interested in expressionism and expressive energy, but also interested in psychoanalysis. And he looks for a kind of impulse, an urge to do something, and he thinks these impulses are the most important things. When there are more urges added to these primal urges, then you have other art forms. And it's interesting that he names all these urges after the art forms which are produced by the urges. So there are symbolic needs, symbolic urges, and then people produce symbolic artworks and so on. Interesting also that the writing is ranking very much downwards because it's mediated expression. He is not very interested in writing, and if there is any writing on artworks, he is mostly not caring for it. He is mostly interested in these artworks as unmediated expression. For him, artworks by mentally ill patients can especially be used to illustrate this schema, this theory, because for Prinzhorn, people with mental illness suffer from a special kind of autism. In fact, all three artists, all three theoreticians, all three psychiatrists think that mental illness, and they mostly talk about schizophrenia, is mainly characterized by a kind of autism, which probably is also due to the fact that they know only long-term patients who show moments of hospitalization and hardly talk anymore. Prinzhorn talks of these late cases especially, and cherishes that these late cases produce artworks as well. Nowadays you could say they try to communicate in a last cry of help or so. But for him, this autism is one factor which somehow excludes a lot of influence from the outside. The second is that these people do spontaneous artworks without being influenced. That is his idea, and they are untrained. And the third thing is that they are in a hospital and they are excluded from exchange with the outside world, which is not true. We know that people in psychiatric asylums had a lot of exchange also with the outside world. But for him, all this makes these psychiatric patients ideal Probanden, ideal people to show the original urge for making art, the original production of art. And therefore he thinks these works, which for him are just products of the unconsciousness, not controlled by any conscious reaction, not controlled by rationality, For him, these works are the most authentic expression of the expressive urge and the need to make art. So you could say, in a way, he is idealizing psychiatric patients to the ideal of romantic art, that somebody is only creating things out of himself or herself, and he is idealizing this unconscious production in the artworks of mentally ill patients. I didn't use the term madness and modernity in the title to allude to Louis Sass' book, but you could say that there is a feature, or there is an idea in Prinzhorn's book which is in line with what Louis Sass talks about. Louis Sass talks about the inclination of artists from symbolism, time of the symbolism, you could say, the inclination to certain features of psychic aberrations or otherness, and therefore a kind of inclination also to artworks and to psychiatric patients in general and their way of experience the world. For Prinzhorn, he seems, or he is convinced that people are interested in artworks by mentally ill people like himself because his time is somehow characterized by a kind of schizophrenic worldview, he calls it. There is a certain kind of inclination to complicated psychic reactions, to nervousness, and therefore the people of his time have a special understanding for these artworks. And then he says there is just a kind of shortcoming if you follow up this trade. What we seem to lack, we people with a kind of schizophrenic worldview seem to lack, is just that primary experience which precedes all knowledge and which alone produces inspired art. So we are looking in the same direction, but we are not the same as these people who produce artworks in mental asylums. Instead, after all our extravagant wishing, after all the determined triumphs over ancient errors, we finally end up with intellectual substitutes. So we, as not mad people, when we try to make art in our time, we just think too much. We are not unconscious enough, and we have not this kind of primary experience as people who are mentally ill. To the people who could read the book and understood German, this obviously resonated, and it resonated especially also with expressionist artists. Interestingly enough, Prinzhorn favors those artists in his collection which show features of expressionism anyway. I mean, as I said, Prinzhorn is a child of his time. He later published an article about his predilection of Van Gogh. He was a big fan of Van Gogh. That's one of his last articles he wrote about art anyway. In 1930 he published that article in an American journal. But already in his book in 1922 he compares Franz Karl Bühler, who is his favorite patient artist, by the way, with Van Gogh. And you can see maybe from these self-portraits there may be some similar expressive features, this kind of way the crayon is put on paper, and also the intense look, and maybe even the ear could remind you of Van Gogh. But of course it says more about Prinzhorn himself, who obviously looked for somebody who was as important as an artist, but also a madman, as Van Gogh in his eyes. Also, one of the very few sculptors in the Prinzhorn collection, Karl Genzel, shows feature of expressionism. This is one of his late works. He was a Mason, Karl Genzel, called Brendel in his book. Bühler was called Paul in Prinzhorn's book. And this is probably one of his late works. He only started carving when he was admitted to a hospital in 1908. And he continued up to his death, obviously, in 1925. This Christ giving birth shows very forceful forms put into each other, like expressionist artists would do it at the same time. The topic is quite special for Brendel. Brendel was very much interested in the mixture of the sexes, or you could say to soothe the tension between the sexes. There are a lot of two-sexed figures by him, and this is also a man who's giving birth. As you can see, there is a little figure coming out of his body to another full-clothed figure, to another human being. And there is another third one which is sucking at his breast. So this is also a two-sexed person. Later, you could say, as if he was collecting works from his predecessors, the collection also included artworks by Adolphe Wölfli and Le Voyageur Français, which came into the collection as well. But now I wanted to talk about artists reacting to Prinzhorn's book. We know some prominent cases of this reaction. We know of Paul Klee, for example, who, when he taught at the Bauhaus, that's related by Schreier, a colleague, showed Prinzhorn's book and said, this is a brilliant Klee and this is a brilliant Klee. So he identified with artworks in Prinzhorn's book. We don't know at which works he pointed, but there are some similarities between artworks in Prinzhorn's book and artworks by Klee, and I just tentatively show here a juxtaposition of an artwork by Johann Knopf, whom you saw already, and one by Paul Klee, the prophetic hag, which is nowadays in the Hamburger Kunsthalle. So the main feature, I think, is that Paul Klee identifies with these artworks. Somehow those works strike a nerve of contemporary artists, expressionist artists, to find something which is giving a foundation, a base of their artworks. I think you could interpret Paul Klee's reactions like that. Another example is Oskar Schlemmer, who saw this drawing of the Prinzhorn collection in a lecture by Prinzhorn in 1920. It's a drawing by Hyacinth Freiherr von Wieser, who is called Wels in Prinzhorn's book, and it's a drawing of will graphs. In fact, it shows a succession of graphs of different complexity, and it shows the title Willenskurven on the top left. The idea behind it is that Hyacinth von Wieser is able to concentrate different forms of will into graphs, and so effectively, there is a magical thinking behind it, that if you follow with your eyes or your head these graphs, the will form, which is included in these graphs, will jump onto you and will force you into that will. Therefore, on the right-hand side, on the right-hand top, there is written, cautious, it's dangerous to look at this. And we know from a diary of Schlemmer that he saw this picture in a lecture by Prinzhorn in 1920, which was given in Stuttgart at the home of the art historian Hildebrand and his wife. A lot of people from the Bauhaus were there, and it predated a lecture which Prinzhorn gave in 1924 at the Bauhaus. Schlemmer notes down, there was this drawing which keeps me thinking of on which was written, cautious, it's dangerous to look at this. He doesn't mention the drawing, but interestingly enough, one day after this lecture, he sketches on a train ride from Stuttgart to Cannstatt this little sketch, which is the first sketch for his triadic ballet. It's a new form of choreographic drawing, which he invented. And for me, it seems quite clear that he was inspired by Hyacinthe Freiherr von Wiese. So he productively used things there to put them into his own works and to go on with his thinking, a train of thinking, and uses these works for his own means. I more extensively want to talk about another case which is more obvious, a case of productive misunderstanding, which also raises questions about looking at these artworks nowadays, I think. It's the very famous piece Miracle Shepherd by August Natterer. It's one of the icons of the Prinzhorn collection, meanwhile. It's a quite short, a small piece, just 20 centimeters high. And it shows a quite puzzling image. It was done with the means of a technical draftsman who August Natterer was. August Natterer was a mechanic and engineer who built machines and apparatuses for different people, also for a guy named Röntgen at the University of Würzburg. We only have found up to now one of his apparatuses, which is this here, a very strange apparatus. It's an underwater siren. Nobody nowadays found out really how it works. There are two copies we found, one in Würzburg and one in Groningen in the museum, and they both have this mark of Natterer on the base of them. So they are works by Natterer. He was a very special mechanic. He suffered a kind of blow of his self-esteem when he lost his job at the university in Würzburg and developed a persecution mania. And then in 1907, on the 1st of April at 12 o'clock, that may be important as well, he had a kind of revelation. He saw at the sky above the military building of Stuttgart, the Rotebühl Kaserne, he saw on the sky about 10,000 pictures within half an hour. He later compares it with a movie, because these images somehow melted into each other. They were in constant movement. And he had to stare, he had to look, like we know from other people who have revelations. They have to stare to see that. And he thought this was a kind of revelation of a part of the Last Judgment, which was not shown to Christ, he said. So he somehow was put into the position of Christ. That somehow put a lot of stress on him. He tried to kill himself, and that's why he came into a mental asylum in 1908. And there, from 1911, he started to make drawings of some of the images he saw. And the shepherd is one of these images. And interestingly enough, there is a part of a kind of interview of Prinzhorn printed in his book where he explains the shepherd. And I just wanted to read that in extenso because it's very interesting to see what was meant by it. Prinzhorn relates, he once claimed that the miracle shepherd originated from the tree trunk with a head, but at another time he held to this description, giving in 1919 to this description. He quotes, "At first a cobra was in the air, iridescent green and blue, and then came the foot along the snake. Then the other foot came, it was made from a turnip." In answer to a question, he said, "The fable of Rübezahl, Reue bezahl, pay for repentance." On this second foot appeared the face of my father-in-law in Würzburg, the world miracle. The forehead was creased, and the seasons of the year came from it. Then it became a tree. The bark of the tree was broken off in front so that the gap formed the mouth of the face. The branches of the tree formed the hair. Then there appeared feminine genitals between the leg and the foot. Those break off the man's foot, which means sin comes from the woman and makes the man fall. One foot is propped against the sky. That means the fall into hell. The toes of this foot are musical notes, but Neta does not know why. Quote, then came a Jew, a shepherd, who had a sheepskin wrapped around him. There was wool on him. Those were a lot of W's, which means much woe will come. These W's were changed into wolves. These wolves were dangerous wolves, and these wolves were changed into sheep. There were the sheep in wolves' clothing, and the sheep then ran round the shepherd. I am the shepherd, the good shepherd, God. He says this very ceremoniously, quote, the wolves are the Germans, my enemies. So you see there is a succession of images, and what Natterer obviously tries is to give a synthesis of what happens one after the other. That's what you can see here, and he tries to depict it with the means of a technical draftsman, very precise in lines, quite naive in the figurative elements, but very precise, and as if he wants to reconstruct as a mechanic what he had seen in the sky. This image was puzzling for Prinzhorn. As you can see with the pseudonym, Natterer was also one of those artists Prinzhorn dedicated a whole chapter to. There were 10 chapters of his 10 schizophrenic masters. Franz Karl Bieler was one of them, Knüpfer was one of them, Brendel was one of them, and so on. And also Natterer. But Natterer is different from the others because he is neither, you could say, leaning to expressionism nor to constructivism. He is something of his own. And Prinzhorn includes him being fascinated, although he is also at the same time completely puzzled and nearly shocked by this picture. He says, the quality of strangeness and the supernatural which agitates and fascinates us so inexplicably. Unless we are mistaken, the characteristic quality lies in the organic forms resulting from the partial drawings of organs, which, however, are not centered anywhere. The fake organisms are neatly drawn to completion and closed on all sides, but once again, with a pointless logic which leads a rational man into an endless maze. Perhaps in no other picture do we confront the specifically schizophrenic emotion as helplessly, because we are not faced with a representation to which we can simply assent aesthetically without asking about meaning. Both means, therefore, which offered us the possibility of entering into schizophrenic conceptual complexes are blocked, the rational as well as the aesthetic. And this somehow impossibility to enter the picture tells us a lot about the way Prinzhorn and also Morgenthaler and Rejá surely had a possibility to understand in their way the artworks of mentally ill patients. They just identified or showed empathy into the images they saw. That was the typical way of understanding artworks, also with most of the art historians at that time, to be empathetic and to identify with the content. And Prinzhorn could not longer identify with this image, and he somehow senses frustration not being able to do that. He cannot enter the picture rationally nor aesthetically, and that's very interesting. This shocking moment, I think, is very interesting, and also at the same time that he cherishes the pictures and is fascinated by them, and he calls him a schizophrenic master. So there is a kind of tension in it. To understand that, maybe it's not superfluous to put a picture from that time beside it, because Natterer produced this picture between 11 and 13, and that's the time when Kirchner, for example, did his famous street scenes. So we're in the high point of expressionism, and Natterer is something completely else. He is not expressive, he is not constructivist, he is something else. Of course, you are not shocked about this picture anymore, because you know similar things, for example, by Max Ernst. But maybe you know this story already. Max Ernst was the one who took the book, brought it with him to Paris and showed it to his colleagues of Surrealism. And he profited the most from the book because he was also able, additionally, to read the text. I mean, what Prinzhorn writes here leads a rational man into an endless maze, or it's not possible to enter the picture rational or aesthetic. That looks or reads like a kind of programmatic description of what the intention of surrealists were, to somehow shock the audience with a new way of producing images. In fact, Max Ernst later said Prinzhorn's book taught him the new construction of pictures, and the main feature of Max Ernst's surrealism, this combination of heterogeneous elements, which the surrealists formerly used in making poems or prose texts, is something which you can find in August Natterer's picture as well. So nowadays you could say we see Natterer through Max Ernst and the surrealism. There is another picture by Max Ernst which, even in the topic, the fall of the angel, resonates the picture of Natterer, this kind of descent into hell. The fall of the angel is a kind of counterpoint, I think, also content-wise, of the August Natterer picture, which talks about the woman brings the man to fall and he falls into hell. The Natterer picture was also present at the important exhibition Works of Pathological Art at the Galerie Max Bien, which was the second exhibition of artworks by mentally ill people in a gallery, a big exhibition in Paris at the end of the 20s. There was one in the Galerie Vivant in 1927, which showed only artworks from the Marie collection. But this bigger collection in the Galerie Max Bien also included artworks from the Prinzhorn collection, and the Miracle Shepherd was part of it. So he was seen in Paris, and of course he became a recurring feature also in publications of the surrealists, for example, in this Dictionnaire abrégé de surréalisme, published in 1938. But the chapter of Natterer was also the first to be translated into French by Meret Oppenheim in 1950. So you can see he is really a kind of icon of the surrealists. For the surrealists, the artworks in Prinzhorn's book somehow seem to have been a kind of guarantee that it's possible to put irrationality into visual arts, which was still in discussion in some circles of the surrealisms at the beginning of the 20s, but then with the help of Prinzhorn's book, obviously as a kind of moment of orientation, the artists somehow found something with which they could work. And of course there are other examples, for example Salvador Dalí. We know that he was fascinated by those images by Karl Lange, images which show pictures which show images Lange saw in the sweat stains of his inserted souls. That's why you have these strange shapes often on his pictures. Also here in the corners of this picture. He said later, if he had had a photographic apparatus in the asylum in which he was around 1900, then he would have had taken photographs. But without, he had to make drawings, amazing drawings of Vexierbilder, vexing images, which you can see from different sides, and they always produce new faces. And obviously, in some pictures you can see that, as here in the big shoe sole as well, these images were also changing, and he tried to keep track of certain changes and made drawings of certain moments of these complex images as well. Salvador Dalí was very interested in these works by Karl Lange, illustrated in Prinzhorn's book. This left picture was illustrated on one of the good plate illustrations, so you could see it in detail very finely. And his paranoid critical method was also based on the pictures of Karl Lange. Famously, Salvador Dalí said the only thing which differentiates myself from mentally ill people is that I'm not mentally ill. But he used the technique, you could say, like Max Ernst used the technique as well. And the third example could be Hans Prinzhorn, who was also from early on very fascinated by Prinzhorn's book, especially by the head footers by Karl Genzel, who are also mixed sex buildings. The woman with a stalk is a woman with a penis here, which has a female side without a beard and a bearded side as well. And Hans Prinzhorn, who was very much interested in this intertwining of the sexes in his pictures, used also this moment of the head footer in a lot of pictures, like in this, the cock or the hen, which is a print from 1960. For me, these last examples, but also the former ones, bring up a lot of questions about our understanding of artworks by mentally ill people. In this case, from Prinzhorn's collection in Heidelberg. Does this kind of juxtaposition, which we did in our shows to bring somehow more attention to the artworks with the help of experts in art who cherished these artworks, does it really help to understand the proper characteristics and the meaning of these artworks? Are they artworks on the same level, or does this juxtaposition, which I showed you, does it not rather serve as a kind of proof that all these artists, expressionists and surrealists, were following a kind of productive misunderstanding, which somehow puts a layer for us on the original artworks and makes us see, for example, the August Natterer Miracle Shepherd through the lens of surrealism, forgetting the shock which this picture originally produced in Prinzhorn and probably also in other contemporary people. You could say, does the professional artwork soothe the shock of the otherness of these artworks? And what do we have to do to get through to the proper qualities and characteristics of these artworks? Is it really helpful just to show artworks like these beside other artworks without commentary, or what should we do to cherish the special qualities of these works? With these questions, I want to close my lecture. Thank you very much for your attention.